Welcome to the 41st episode of the Hail Mary podcast. I'm Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to give our hot takes on our win over FIU and throw some Hail Mary shots downfield for listeners to love or hate. Let's get started. It wasn't the dominant win we hoped for, but UTSA left Miami with their first win in the state of Florida. UTSA limped into Miami after suffering even more injuries on the O-line and D-line. But Traylor duct taped his team together and plugged in some younger players into key roles. The Roadrunners started out slow on offense and were held scoreless in the first quarter. They finally came alive in the second quarter, scoring 17 points and holding FIU to just a field goal. In the second half, we added 2 touchdowns and held FIU scoreless until the last minute of the game. While the team let FIU hang around longer than they should, ultimately the game was never in question. But the story of the night was the young players who stepped up. Kavorian Barnes ran for 128 yards and scored his first 2 rushing touchdowns. Dan Dishman scored his first touchdown, and Walter Beatty got his first start as left guard. The Roadrunners improved to 5-2 on the season and 3-0 in conference play. What were your thoughts on the game?
In the preview, we kind of talked about the fact that, I thought that they would come out and they just really demoralize FIU early. I said how much FIU really wasn't very good. It just never felt like it happened.
Right.
Now, you talked about how they were in control of the game. It's true. It just never felt like we were really demoralizing FIU. It felt more like FIU having more issues, and because they had issues on offense and defense, that's really, it was the difference between UTSA really shutting the door on them and this really becoming more of a blowout. I think we really all expected, and we go back to the Texas Southern game where we thought that UTSA was going to come out and really just hammer Texas Southern. It just never really materialized. Final score shows that it did, but we all know what the score was.
It was much closer at halftime. Yeah.
So this, you're kind of expecting at one point, when is UTSA going to come out and just really slam the door on somebody? Because I think it's important for the team to finally really just shut another team down, whether they're a really good team or just a really bad team. There's got to be something at some point where they impose themselves on someone else. And I just never felt like they really imposed themselves on FIU. And, I guess that's really what it's really come down to is a little bit of frustration, right? I think, we were actually at ACL this weekend, so we didn't see this live. Well, we tried to, but we didn't see it live. And for the most part, we were kind of going back and forth and looking, just looking at the score, kind of looking at play-by-play whenever we got that coverage, the cell coverage. But it just felt like the defense was really more the frustration. It's not the offense. The offense has had more catastrophic injuries. The defense, to me, hasn't. They've had some injuries on the defensive line, but the offensive line is so ravaged. We talked about Frankie Martinez, a walk-on, playing. Now we just had Walker Beatty, essentially a defensive lineman to start the season, went from offensive guard to offensive tackle and left tackle at that. It's the offense has been able to adjust at every moment, and the defense has been kind of they're talented guys, and we've talked about it in the preseason. We've talked about it throughout. We've got some really good corners. We've got some good linemen, but it just doesn't seem like it's really gelling on that side of the ball. And I guess that's where my frustration lies. But I've kind of just gone on and thrown a whole bunch of thoughts at you, so hit me with whatever you got.
Yeah, no, I was really glad we didn't watch this game live in its entirety. Like you mentioned, we saw pieces of it as cell coverage would allow. And actually, that was probably good because, there was a concert going on, and we were in the middle of the crowd while we're watching our phone. And there was one fun point where Dan Dishman caught the touchdown pass. We actually had cell coverage at that point, and so he cut the touchdown pass, and I yelled out, and then I realized that it was one of those rare quiet moments in between, sets or songs. So everyone was kind of looking at me
It was fine. Everybody thought it was just the drunk girl, the drunk older lady that was.
Yeah. Go Chicks! Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, because we were watching the Chicks.
Yeah.
But on the rewatch, I was frustrated at points because, again, the offense started slow. There were times where they weren't getting in rhythm, and that was frustrating. And I think if I didn't know the outcome of the game, I really would have been very, kind of frustrated with that, especially that first half. But knowing the outcome of the game, it's like, okay, I know we're not going to get anywhere on this. I know we're not going to get anywhere on this drive, but at the end of the day, we're going to win, so it's okay. But like you mentioned, I mean, my initial thought with this game was like a couple of other games this season where it's like, well, a win is a win. And that's not where we thought we would be this season. There was also some talk on Twitter during the game that, we were playing down to our opponent. And, I don't know if that's necessarily the case, that we're playing down, as much as, we had younger guys playing in this game that probably Traylor would have had some guys that maybe weren't ready to come back play if this was a different opponent. So that probably played a part to it. I think we're all just waiting for that big, decisive victory this season.
Yeah, and it feels like there's just got to be the statement of, hey, this is we're peaking, or we're starting to hit our peak, and that hasn't really happened. Where like last year, we kind of talked about in the last podcast, where there wasn't really blowouts last season, but we went through a stretch of about 3 games in October where it was just dominating every single Conference USA opponent. And to me, I don't know that Conference USA is really as strong as we want to make it out to be. There's only 3 teams with winning overall records, and that's Western Kentucky, who we've already beaten, and we're facing North Texas this week. So, is Conference USA really that good, or is it that, that the teams, have their moments, and so they're just catching other teams at the right time? I think that's really more the story.
Yeah, I think that's more of the story as well, and I think that's a good thing for UTSA, because we're obviously not playing our best football right now, given all of the injuries, and maybe other issues too. I mean, every time Traylor talks to the media, he just sounds frustrated, down on himself. Like, he almost sounds like the coach that's sitting on the edge of a hot seat, not the guy that just signed a 10-year contract,
And it's 5-2.
Yeah. So maybe there's other factors going on that, again, we just don't get to see.
I mean, and so that is a good point, because, again, we get the frustration. We nitpick at a bunch of things on the podcast, because that's what we do. I mean, it's our view. It's what we think. We just start throwing out some things out there that we've seen. And, again, some are nitpicks, some are, true problems. But I still think he's done a pretty damn good job getting the team to 5-2 with all of these injuries, especially on the offensive end. And I think that's really why I keep going back to the offensive end. This offense should be much more of a mess.
That's why I said, man, he'd like duct tape those kids up and throw them out on the field. But again, I think he's probably just frustrated by the fact that he had to do that. He was thinking, okay, well, given who's coming back this season, that, maybe this would be more of a, cakewalk, or they'd have this kind of big dominant season, and he's just frustrated because that hasn't happened, given, all of the injuries and what have you.
And I'd argue it shows just how strong of a head coach he is by the fact that things aren't going according to the preseason plan.
Right.
Which, how many times do coaches, and even Traylor, have said, it never goes to plan. Like,
right.
There's always like something you have to adjust to. So, I kind of feel like, look, as much as we keep harping on this thing that we want to see this dominant win, the thing is that we're still 5-2.
A win is a win.
I mean, well, yeah, but I mean, we're 5-2. You're 3-0 in conference. You're one of 2 teams that's undefeated. You've got a big game coming up. You've done a hell of a job of just making sure that this team gets to this spot.
Right.
Now, the question is, how do you continue to elevate? And I think that by the way he's rotated players, by the way he's done some other things, even though it's been frustrating, I think, from a fan's point of view that, just, again, harping on again, haven't been as dominant. It's good that we're getting all these players playing, because we're giving them time. Because, I mean, look at Frankie Martinez. I mean, you can put him into the offensive line without even saying, oh, man, we're putting a walk-on in. And you're not thinking twice because he's had so many snaps against some big time opponents where he's been overwhelmed, and now he's not looking as overwhelmed.
Right, and Walker Beatty, I mean, what a phenomenal game he had, given the fact that he really had a couple of weeks on the offensive line, but just really a week at that position. And, listening to his interview today, post-practice, it was kind of hilarious because the way that Traylor asked him to play on the offensive line, I just thought was a hilarious story. He said Traylor called him at 1:30 in the morning with the "you up" text.
And he was freaking out because he's like, oh no, what did I do? I did something wrong.
I must be in trouble.
Yeah.
What coach calls at 1:30 a.m.?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're going to call from the coach, you're going to call from, like, essentially a parental figure, you're like, uh-oh, like, something's up. Like, something's afoot. Something's wrong, right? So the fact that, that's how it happened, it was a funny story. If anybody gets a chance that hasn't heard it by the time you hear our episode, check it out. I think both Toves and I will tell you, give us more Walker Beatty on the quote-unquote podium on the interviews, because even if he doesn't even have a big role in the game, just give us your views, Walker, because he was just kind of funny during the entire process. So anyway, despite all that, despite we've had some frustrations on the fan side, despite the fact that we had all these players that were missing, we kind of sat some people out. Pretty clean game, I guess you can say, in terms of penalties.
Only 3 penalties for 30 yards. That is the lowest amount of penalties we've had all season.
And I mean, the pessimist in me would say, was it just the officials going, hey, we just want to get out of here? Like, it's steamy Miami, and we don't want to be out here any more than the players do.
It didn't really seem like there were like a lot of bad non-calls or any kind of weird officiating or anything like that. I mean,
it's Conference USA, so it's. I mean, we saw the the Western Kentucky game where we talked about the fact that it felt like they just made a call and they're like, yeah, we can't really see that replay, so you know what, just whatever you called, just go with it.
Yeah, I mean, there was a false start on Frankie, one holding call on Zakari, which you could tell he held.
Yeah.
And then a pass interference on Zay, which, people have lots of opinion on pass interference calls. So
subjective call.
We could probably make an argument on both sides. But, I mean, really, overall, that was it. But I will tell you, the one thing is, it's very clear that we should remain playing in the Alamo Dome as much as possible, because clearly any bit of weather, humidity, moisture, whatever, we get a little fumblerooski.
I mean, I get that, but I will argue then this. Your culture is triangle of toughness. I mean, are you saying you're only tough in the Alamo Dome? That kind of sounds really bougie. So I'm just going to say, if your whole credo is we're the triangle of toughness, it doesn't matter what the elements are. You're going to go kick some butt somewhere.
Triangle of toughness inside when it's between 72 and 74 degrees.
All right. All those thoughts, let's start talking about, each side of the ball. So let's start out with the special teams like we always do. Rough week, I would say, for the special teams. 22-yard punt from Lucas Dean.
Just uncharacteristic.
Yeah. And then a missed field goal from Jared Sackett. This one was odd because I know we replayed it, 5-6 times?
Probably.
Because both of us were really trying to, without going forward too much, trying to figure out what went wrong. And it really seemed like Jared Sackett really started leaning forward and actually moved early. Now, I saw this with the UT kicker right before half. He did that. No flag was thrown, which I thought was odd because you have a guy moving that. That should be, I think, false start or whatever. But in this case, he started moving early, and it threw off the entire timing because it didn't seem like it was a very clean snap, and Lucas had to adjust. And I think had the timing been there like they normally practice, this wouldn't have been a problem.
Yeah, and then you had the bad snap on the extra point attempt on that very last touchdown, which forced Lucas Dean to have to try to do a 2-point conversion. And, having not seen that initially when I was looking at it while we were at ACL, I thought, well, here's Traylor going for a 2-point conversion, like when we're up 30 points. Like, that's weird, but okay. But it didn't work. And then when we watched the play, I was like, oh, okay. Well, now I understand. We didn't really try a 2-point conversion there. But, yeah, that just, seemed like a miscue. And again, not something that we've seen. So not sure what was really going on there.
And to go back to our thoughts from the game, when we talked a little bit about frustrations and not being able to slam the door on a team, like this is the type of like losing your focus in certain parts of the game where you're like, is the team okay? Like, did we just not travel again? Like, what's going on? Because it just didn't seem like they were as locked in. And
apparently there's something about Florida. Like, it just throws us off.
I guess so. I mean, and I would argue...
Florida and DFW, we just need to minimize our time there.
I mean, I would argue this. Like, you don't really have, like... That's not where your new guys are. So, what's going on? Again, the questions come up, and I think that's where the frustration really starts building. It's like, oh, we can't even get our special teams down. Like, what's going on? So, anyway, tough week for the special teams.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would have liked to have seen Chris Carpenter get a chance to, like, return another kick. Like, I don't know about you, but to me, I'm looking forward to some of these kickoffs because I want to see if, like, Chris Carpenter can rip off another big return.
Right.
I'm not even asking for a touchdown. I'm just saying I want to see a playmaker get the ball in some space and have a chance at making another play. He's just seemed kind of fun in that. So enough with the special teams. Let's go on to the offensive review. My key to victory was execute early on drives and jump on the scoreboard early. I mean, it felt like the offense was stuck in the Florida swamp. We kind of talked about, like, Frank just seemed a little off. His passes just weren't... The timing was just off. Like, he was throwing to the receiver as opposed to, like, leading him like he was, like, in previous games. So it just seems, again, it just seems like it wasn't as bad against Western Kentucky. And this game just seemed like, I don't know. Again, they just seem off. And I think it just kind of... I think just overall, the offense... despite all these injuries and despite Frank being a little off, still kind of muddles through and still puts up like 30 points.
Yeah. I mean, I just wondered at the beginning of the game if maybe, Frank knew that he had Walter starting for the very first time and, Frankie back in at the lineup. And these are areas where, these two are new. So I just almost wondered if he was like in his head a little bit, like I've got to get this ball away quickly, I may not have enough time, and then maybe that just kind of like maybe he was overthinking it. It wasn't like the pocket was collapsing on him or that he really was getting a ton of pressure, so it just seemed like maybe something was in his head, like he was seeing ghost or anticipating that was what was going to happen. And then when he kind of settled in and realized, like, oh, the O-line's holding up better than maybe any of us expected, okay, I can, take the time to focus and not just immediately go to my first read.
Well, I think the other part to this is the fact that Mike McIntyre, who I didn't mention, I mean, I was right last week when I was talking about it, that he had been the head coach of San Jose State when they came, I think it was 2013, and just thrashed UTSA. I mean, obviously 3 years into the program. He was the defensive coordinator actually from Memphis last season. So he's already seen this UTSA team. And I think he's looked at what Western Kentucky did. And Mike McIntyre is a good defensive coordinator. Traylor kind of raved about him, over and over. Like, yeah, I've known Mike. I know he's going to have a solid plan. And it looked like it because I think what they were doing was really just getting into a coverage. And I think they would show something and then go back into a coverage. And that, I think, is what we thought was going to happen at the beginning of the season where Frank was going to have to really kind of be pinpointing some of these passes and try to tear apart zone defenses. And that's not really what's happening. They, at the beginning of the season, all these teams decided to play like essentially man-on-man on our big three. And so Frank had an embarrassment of riches, to be honest with you. I think, he was just trying to figure out like which open guy do I hit? Because really that's what was happening. It's not happening as much anymore because now Conference USA is essentially saying, all right, we're going to drop into coverage. You guys are going to have to run the ball. That's the only way for us to slow you down. And, I think that adds just a little bit of frustration too for Frank because it's like he'd rather be trying to, throw some bombs down the field to the big three. I don't fault him for that because I'd want that too. I mean, if I had three talented guys like that and add Oscar and Dan Dishman in there, and then add any of like Brendan Brady, Traylon, Kavorian Barnes, who we're going to talk about here shortly. I feel for him sometimes because it's like, all right, which guy's going to get the ball? Oh, there's only one ball to go around, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how some of these other defenses start playing UTSA. They're probably going to keep dropping back in coverage and probably going to start frustrating Frank a little bit more. So it'll be interesting how when I say we, it's really going to be Will Stein and Matt Maddox. How do they decide to counter those coverages? So, but I really want to talk about Kavorian Barnes because hell of a game. You mentioned it in your recap.
He just found out that he might get to play in this game. It wasn't like he was taking the snaps with the ones in preparation. He said, I was just ready. I knew it might happen, but I was ready. And, he went in probably much earlier than they anticipated and just had an amazing game. I mean, 20 carries for 128 yards, one catch for 13 yards. I mean, that's a pretty spectacular game, let alone for that really being the first time you are the featured back. And then you add your first 2 rushing touchdowns on top of that. I mean, that had to have been like a dream come true for him.
Ho-hum again. Like, we talked about last week, though, hey, all these things are happening on the offense. The big three are having these great receiving games. Frank's having a video game type year where he's just awesome. And we just kind of like shrug it off like, yeah, he's been doing this forever. So, it's happened. But then you get Kavorian Barnes that has this great game. And, it feels a little ho-hum for me again, just because I guess the thought of just putting somebody back there and I guess watching him run too, he probably had like, I don't know, you can count on one hand how many touches he had prior to this game. He just looked fresh. Mm-hmm. He looked like he had just come out of like training camp, like in the first game of the season. He looked like when he was running, like he was just a different back out there than Brendan or Traylon. And I don't know that he's faster than Traylon or as fast as Traylon. Certainly faster than Brendan, but I think it was a good way to spell Brendan because Brendan really carried us the first couple of games.
Yeah. Before this game, Kavorian had 6 carries for 20 yards.
So, again, I think this is, again, a testament to the type of skill players that are around there now. And hopefully this kind of really starts building his confidence. Obviously, if you've probably rushed 6 times for 20 yards, I don't think you're anticipating, having a 20-ish carry game with 120 20 yards that he had. So, good for him. And good for him for, actually taking advantage of the opportunity. I mean, some guys will go out there, they'll get that opportunity and may have a couple good moments, but for the most part, maybe not have a great game. Not Kavorian. So,
yep.
Good to see him have a good game. We also got to see a little bit of Jalen Lott.
Yeah, he was on the field at the very end with Eddie Lee.
We had an Eddie Lee sighting too, which is good.
And as much as we, criticized the offense and the defense in this game, the fact that we were able to sit our starters for the majority of the fourth quarter, again, we would have loved it to be longer, but huge help, going into this week, knowing that they're preparing for a really big game against North Texas.
Yeah, very good point. Guy we didn't see there was Ty Edwards. He did post on his Instagram, "Free me." So, is he still with the team? Your thoughts?
I don't know. We really haven't seen any of him, so I don't know if that's just a fact that Kavorian Barnes has surpassed him in practice, and so that's why he's traveling, or what it means. It was just very interesting to see that tweet from him. Or that post from him, and not sure what that means for the future at UTSA.
I mean, I had heard that he had, had some problems with, pass protection. So that was part of the reason why early in the season he was going to probably see very spot duty because of that. I mean, if that's what essentially ends up getting him buried on the depth chart, well, it's not going to get easier anywhere else. And It's not like I'm trying to dog on him. It's just that, if that's what the coaches feel like you need to work on, then you work on that.
Right.
And, you make sure that you're solid there because of the type of offense you're going to have to be running. So,
And it's not that we don't have talent in that room. It's that we had talent that was injured.
Right.
You know, so
Yeah.
you got to make the most of your reps, you know, and if you don't, somebody else is going to get healthy and they're going to come back.
And I mean, that's just the culture of this team.
Mm-hmm.
So, real quick, offensive player of the game, Kevorian Barnes. Again, had a great game. He ended up with a 73 PFF grade. He just felt like the big spark that the offense needed to really get going. So, Kevorian, hell of a game. Let's go to the defense, because I think I've got some more questions for you here. But let me start out with this. Key to the game was wear them down on the defense and demoralize this bad offense. I mean, the defense played well. I'm not really going to knock them too much, but it really felt like FIU was inept in so many times, or in so many plays, that it didn't feel like the defense really kind of was able to impose themselves on there. Case in point, there was one play, and I know, again, you know, one play shouldn't really define everything, but I think it just spoke to where FIU is right now, where Grayson James, quarterback, threw a pass out to a receiver, and the receiver was out there blocking instead of like looking for the pass. You know, again, whatever the call was, clearly someone's on the wrong page.
Yeah, I mean, he basically just like threw the guy's ankles.
Yeah, I mean, he was also under pressure from this, you know, from this UTSA defense. That was something that we were able to see, was more pressure was on Grayson James, and you know, that's a good at least confidence builder for this team. That's going to be needed as the next few games come along, because we are going to have a tough stretch here that's coming up.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that Traylor, you know, was talking about this defense and kind of their pressure on the quarterback, and saying, you know, he thought that we were playing a lot like we did in 2020, where, you know, you had Charles Wiley and Clarence Hicks that were getting pressure on the quarterback, but they weren't getting the sacks. Yeah, it wasn't until 2021 when Clarence Hicks, you know, finally was, you know, getting those 10 sacks. And, you know, hopefully that's what's going to happen, but happen this season, maybe not, you know, have to wait an entire season to see that success with these guys. You know, it's like Traylor said, it's not like he just finally told Chuck and, you know, Hicks, hey, will you just go sack them? And then all of a sudden they started doing it.
So here's a question for you. You know, I talked about how things just seem to be gelling with this defense. What are some early thoughts, or maybe some reasons of why this could be?
You know, there was some discussion preseason. I forgot who they were interviewing, but one of the guys mentioned that there was some issues with the new transfers to the team and getting them acclimated to the culture, you know, kind of getting them past their egos. And so, you know, I almost wonder if maybe, while they said that had been fixed, that, you know, maybe some of that is a bit of a hangover, and why they're not necessarily gelling as well as you would expect them to.
I agree. I mean, I think that there's probably some of that, and I think it's always easy to say, hey, this new change is going to fit me well. And that's not always the case. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, you decide to go, you know, for instance, your friend tells you, hey, you should come work at this company that I'm at. You know, we have a great culture. We have all this stuff. You know, we do all these things. And you show up there and you're like, yeah, it's good, but I don't know that I fit here. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I just attribute it like that, real life. And I think there's a lot to say that probably is the reason too, where, you know, you feel a little excluded and you're like, you know, these guys really know each other and they're really kind of surrounding them and they've welcomed me and everything, but I still feel like I'm not part of the team, because this is how we did it over here at the place that I was at.
Well, and I'm sure the part that might be a little more frustrating about how we handle our defense is just the fact that we do rotate so many guys. So even if you are a starter, you're not going to get as many reps as you might at another school, because that's just not how we manage our defense. You know, and maybe that's something that might, again, if you don't have the team camaraderie built as well as you want to have, you know, maybe that can kind of create some issues as you are rotating people through, that they're not necessarily, you know, playing as in sync with each other as you would expect that they would be.
Yeah, it feels like almost to say, and I guess I hate to put it this way, but it's like an entitlement to, I should get this many snaps. And it's kind of funny because it reminds me a little bit of U.S. women's national team, a talented group of women that are playing soccer at a very high level, but they talk about how going into training camp, they work as hard as they can, because there's somebody right behind them that could take their starting spot at any moment. And so, they always talk about how the fact that, not really taking any drills off, not really, not taking anything's easy, like everything's, done at a high level. And I guess thinking about how the way you answered that, that's what it reminds me of. And I kind of think that maybe that's exactly how Traylor's also handling stuff here, is that, it happens to all of us, but, I think if you're a newcomer to that, you'd be like, yeah, why am I getting rotated out? So lots of good points there. Let's talk about Nick Booker-Brown. Big game. He seemed to be living in the backfield.
Yeah, I mean, he had 6 tackles, 2 solo, 1 sack, 2.5 tackles for loss, and pretty good stats that we led the team basically in all of the stats.
Also, Trey Moore, outside linebacker. I think he had like about 2.5 sacks. Also living in the backfield. Good to see these guys, both young guys who have already been performing on the defense, or performing, pretty well on the defense, I think, throughout the season, really starting to make an impact. And I think this is I guess a point in time where it's like, maybe these guys do need to be on the field a little bit longer. And I think we start seeing that with the announcement this week that Jamori Robinson, who's been backing up Trey Moore, is now being moved to the line. Mm-hmm. Again, trying to make sure that Trey Moore just doesn't come off the field. We've talked about how there's rotations, but there's also, I think, trying to find places for other guys to get some time that are talented, and maybe we can use them in a different spot. And I think Jamori might find a home there on the defensive line. Mm-hmm. Other thing I want to talk about real quick is Corey Mayfield. I've been raving about him all season about how good he's been covering. Got his first interception of the season.
Yeah, that was great.
So I think overall, again, even though there's frustration, I think, with the defense, and obviously we talked about the rotations and how that could play into this. I'm hoping that as they continue moving forward, that they continue kind of really gelling a little bit more and really start seeing a little bit more, I would say, more of a shutdown on opposing defenses, because I think that that's what they need. I talked about the stats last week, and you were giving me that look where did you get these numbers from? We're not that bad, but I think that really highlights the fact that there's plenty of talent on the defensive side. It's just, how do they start locking down some of these teams? Not to make the statistics look better necessarily, but I think to finally live up to that potential that I think they even feel like they're not reaching yet. Mm-hmm. All right, last thing. Defensive player of the game, Nick Booker-Brown is who I'm giving it to. Look, I think you can make a case for Trey Moore getting the defensive player of the game again. Reason I'm going NBB is simply for the fact that in the limited snaps that he really had a huge impact. So that was my tiebreaker. All right, let's talk North Texas Mean Green.
Hate week.
Yep. We're going to tell you through this preview about why it's a rivalry, and we're going to give you a bunch of facts. This thing could go a little bit long, at least this section. But you know what? When it's a rival, why not have some fun with it, right? Why not just rehash some things? Because that's what's fun about having a rival. There's a lot of similarities between North Texas and UTSA, to include, and also rehash for some that don't know, Toves.
Yep. Yeah, so I started my college career at the University of North Texas, and I transferred to UTSA. It's interesting because I think the storyline that lots of people will paint for you is that these are very different universities, that, UNT is more of the traditional college, this established culture, student life, athletics, etc. And certainly they have been much more established than UTSA in terms of how long they've been a university. They've had sports and athletics for much, much longer, than we have. But the thing that I think people forget, and that certainly most North Texas students and fans aren't going to paint for you, is that as much as North Texas likes to call UTSA a commuter school, in a lot of ways, they're a commuter school. And I know it's been a hot second since I was in college, but that was one of the things that surprised me about my experience at North Texas. When you look at their student demographics, there are a lot of kids that are from the Metroplex that go to North Texas. And while again, it's not like it's in the city of San Antonio or city of Dallas, a big city, the Metroplex, is a very large area, and it's very easy to go home. And a lot of kids end up commuting from their homes to Denton. A lot of kids go home on the weekends, even if they have a dorm. And actually, if you look at just even this year, they have 32,000 undergrads, but they only have campus housing for just over 6,000 students. That's not a gigantic percentage of their student population. Denton's a small town. It's got some cool areas to it, but it's very easy to go to Dallas, to go to these other places that have more of a nightlife.
Right.
So again, people leave campus on the weekends, people go home, people commute, and that's not the picture that, again, most people are going to paint of North Texas. They're going to make it, feel like it's College Station or something, like it's out on an island. It's absolutely not on an island. And even more today, like, you barely realize that you've left Dallas because it's just kind of like this continuous, city, drive up 35 into Denton. It's not like even it was at one point where, like, once you left, Louisville, you felt like, okay, well, there's like a little bit of a break here before you get to Denton. Like, it's just one gigantic city. It is definitely a different vibe than I think, again, most people try to paint for you. And the student life there, if you go to the football games, there's not a lot of student engagement. It's really fun and cool to go tailgate outside of Apogee Stadium, but it's not really cool to go inside.
Yeah.
You see these kids out there, tailgating, but man, if you just hiked up a hill with your beer and you can't bring your beer inside and you still have some left, like, you're not going to go inside and leave your beer. You're not going to hike back to your dorm or your car or whatever and drop it off. Like, they just hike back to their car and they go home, or hike back to their dorm and they meet up with some friends and they go into DFW for the weekend. So, I mean, the fact that we have as many students coming out to our games, and frankly, UTSA's housing now is right around 4,000. We do have less undergrads. So, again, we're kind of starting to look more similar than most North Texas fans are going to admit in terms of, like, the campus life. We're even getting pretty close in terms of the number of first-gen students. North Texas had 40% first-gen last year. We had 45% first-gen. Our freshman retention rates are the same. So, again, you can paint this picture that UTSA is like this commuter school, but so are you.
And with Toves coming back to UTSA to finish her degree there, I got to say, we've talked about Coach Aston and Coach Traylor being these incredible recruiters. I'm going to go ahead and take the credit of me being a great recruiter and getting Toves back here. So, yeah, when you guys talk about recruiting at UTSA, the Toves is the best recruiter, because I was able to convince Toves to come to
That's
UTSA.
Right.
And I saved her from future marriage troubles and Seth Luttrell. So
That's
you're
right.
welcome.
That's right. And look, alumni engagement, student engagement in terms of athletics, it's a challenge at North Texas. I don't want to get into a whole thing on attendance, but, if you want to feel good about UTSA's attendance numbers, just go take a look at what North Texas has done. This long established program who has played football for a number of years, who's had a campus for many, many, many more years than UTSA has. They're not drawing in people from the Metroplex, and they certainly aren't drawing in their students.
Boom. UNT leads this series 5-4 overall. There's been so many fun and terrible moments for UTSA during the series, which makes it really such the rivalry. Let's start this out. I'm going to go through the years. Toves, you jump in if you've got an additional story on this, but let's start out with the first one, 2013. We were there with Big Brown, bitter cold game.
The iceberg.
Yeah, UTSA wins 21-13. They didn't just win 21-13. They kept North Texas from winning the West Division of Conference USA. the beginnings of some hate towards each other. 2014, there really wasn't much of a story. UTSA won 34-27 at the end of the season. I think it had been a rough season for us.
It was like a sigh of relief that we had won another game. I mean, after starting out 2014 with such a high, beating Houston, we had that rough game against UTEP, injuries. Yeah, it was just like, oh, we won. And we all got to go on the field afterwards.
Yeah, we had to look back at that. 2015 was tough because it was essentially two bad teams going up against each other. North Texas' only win of the season happens in Apogee Stadium. They beat Coker and essentially start sealing his fate, in my opinion. And then I think that begins sort of some more hate because they start putting the stake in most of our coaches here. 2016 is infamous for the Blackbird uniforms. One and only time we ever saw them. Also, Josiah leaping the offensive line to sack Mason Fine in a 31-17 victory. First time Luttrell is in the Alamo Dome. His first loss to UTSA, but his last loss for a few years. Because in 2017, the drive in Denton. North Texas comes back last minute, essentially drives the entire field, and essentially to me begins Wilson's demise when they win 29-26. Really tough game. We were at ACL. We were coming back. I was like, oh, we're going to win. And then I looked back and I was all, how the hell did they win? And you're like,
oh my
what
God,
do you mean?
I know.
And I was like, I don't think we even saw the game.
No.
But
no.
Just seeing some of the reaction on Twitter and seeing like even other fans that we ran into after that, wow. 2018, just a terrible year for UTSA. But to me, it was Sackett missing his final field goal of his UTSA career until he transferred back this season to tie the game against a heavy favorite in UNT. They escaped with a 24-21 win in the Dome. Again, now Luttrell goes up 2-1 on UTSA. He makes it 3-1 the next season.
That awful
in
game.
Denton. Another awful game where Frank was injured. Frank Harris was injured on the second offensive play. And North Texas just destroyed UTSA 45-3. It wasn't even as close as that score indicates. And the score's not even close.
I mean, man, Frank went down. Leroy Watson ended up in the hospital. Like, that was just, yeah.
Wilson's fate was sealed that night as soon as, the final gun was sounded. Because really, the season was in shambles. And there was just no way that they were going to recover from any of this. Then comes 2020. We get Traylor, and the first defeat for Seth Luttrell in the rivalry game or the rivalry series. Again, COVID kind of plays a role in this, but they got blown out. They were a disaster. They came into the Dome and lost 49-17 in Traylor's first season, which brings us to last season, 2021. UTSA going in undefeated into Denton and then laying just a huge dud there. North Texas not only gains their bowl eligibility, but they ruined UTSA's perfect season with a blowout win, 45-23.
And Seth, thank you very much, because apparently, we turned your career around right there.
Yeah, absolutely. There is no love lost between Seth Luttrell and Jeff Traylor. There have been what seems like a little bit of chippiness between the two of them.
Absolutely.
One of those things is that Luttrell does own UTSA 4-2. And Traylor really hasn't turned that around yet. Obviously, they only played 2 games, but he could have had the upper hand by going up 2-0 on Luttrell last season. Didn't happen. So there's some other stories that came out about why there seems to possibly be this chippiness. And one was Jamal Ligon, starting inside linebacker for UTSA. He had committed to North Texas, and he decided to do a visit here to UTSA. And as Traylor tells it, and Ligon confirmed, they were at Top Golf, and Jamal got a call from North Texas and said, what are you doing at UTSA? And they essentially sounded like kind of, I wouldn't say chew him out, but they kind of reprimanded him for even coming to UTSA. It caused Jamal to rethink a lot of things. He said he went back to the hotel. Coach Traylor said, hey, you know what, do what you got to do. You already committed to them. If you're not even consider us, just go do you. Go back to them. It's fine.
Yeah, and just a reminder, Jamal had played for Traylor's brother, right?
Right. So Jamal then goes back to his hotel with his mom. He goes to essentially go work out, because he said that's what he does when he gets really frustrated. And he worked out, and then he came back and decided to decommit from North Texas. And I don't blame him, to be honest with you. If somebody that I was potentially going to work for is all of a sudden kind of lecturing me about something before I even get on campus and begin my student life there's no way that I'm going to be too thrilled about that. So again, lots of chippiness. And that's what I think makes this entire series, as I've gone through every single season that we've played North Texas, there's been a story, and I think as much as nobody really wants to say it's a rivalry or doesn't want to really kind of attach to it.
No one associated with the programs, like the students try to act like, oh no, it's not, or the athletes, it's not a rivalry. I think the fans would tell you it's a rivalry.
Yeah, because, look at all the stories I just told. All of it's fun. All of it is rivalry-ish. There's got to be more to it, and I think it's more fun because of the fact that we play each other every single year. And I think that's what's lost with Texas State when we don't play them, is that it's much like the Texas A&M series. You barely see that rival, and so it doesn't really mean as much anymore as Texas and Texas A&M. Well, Texas State, it just doesn't mean too much with UTSA unless you're talking about other sports. But football is king in Texas, so this is where things really come to a head.
And up until the last couple of years, these were close games. Really is the last 3 years where it's been blowout on one side or the other side.
Right. Which I think just adds to the spiciness of the rivalry.
Yeah. The other fun thing, we listened to Luttrell's radio show today, and somebody asked him, hey, have you ever been on the field when the students rushed it? And he was like, no. Well, of course not. A, there are no students at your games to rush the field. And then, what are they rushing on the field for, if they were, I guess you could have said last year, but, it was raining. There were 15 people in the stands at the end of the game.
Most of them UTSA fans are crying, but...
they were like, well, we're not going to drive back right now anyway, so...
Toves taking some shots. All right, let's get into the game previews. Their offense is ranked 13th overall. It's gaining almost 504 yards per game. 13th overall in the nation. Big. They're putting up 36.1 points per game, which is 28th in the nation, right behind UTSA, who is 27th. Look, they've got a tough rushing offense. That's what they've put essentially based their whole identity on, being physical, being tough, which is weird because it came from the Mason Fine era where it was much more of a finesse type, offensive team. It's going to go up against a UTSA defense ranked 107th overall. We're getting better because of that FIU game. So, some of the stats dropped a little bit more, but we're still giving up almost 430 yards per game. UTSA is allowing 29.7 points per game, which is almost 30 points. What can you do, right? Again, once we start getting more into conference play, I think you'll see some of these numbers drop. Here's a nice number to remember when you're talking about North Texas. Yes, they do run the ball, but when they do pass, they've only allowed 6 sacks. That's tied for 12th in the nation. UTSA is tied for 64th in the nation with 13 sacks allowed. We know the offensive line problems UTSA has had. North Texas has not had those problems. North Texas has done a very good job of protecting Austin Ani, their quarterback. Speaking of which, Austin Ani is completing 56% of his passes. He's thrown 17 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. He's got a 73.6 PFF grade. It's above average grade. He's not going to be asked to do much to lose the game, much like UTEP, where you had Gavin Hardison, where not trying to have him do too much because you're going to run the game. You're going to rush the ball, and you're going to make sure that you play some tough defense.
One thing about Austin Ani that I don't know, I guess I missed somewhere. I didn't realize that he had been at Arkansas until today when Traylor said that he had coached Austin Ani at Arkansas. Even when you go back and look at his stats, it doesn't really mention anything because I don't think he actually played at Arkansas. He was a walk-on, but who knew?
The ties between both teams. It's very, very, very rivalry-ish because it's, just players going kind of between, whether they were recruited or whether they had some sort of tie to either one of the schools. It's crazy. They have a stable of running backs led by running back Oscar Attaway, who's coming back essentially from an ACL injury from last season. He has 101 rushes for 528 yards. He's rushed for 5 touchdowns. Very good back. Again, he didn't play last year during the blowout. You know who did? Edo Ayeyi. He is a big time.
Mouthful.
I know it is. And I think I said it right. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. He's a badass at running back is all I'm going to say. He's a big play guy. He's got 67 rushes for 557 yards. That's 8.3 yards per carry. 8.3. Wow. And he busted out, I think it was like about a 60, maybe a 92-yard run this past weekend against La Tech.
Yep.
Had some big runs against UTSA last year. So, yeah. We've only talked about two of them. We're about to talk about the third one. And I hope I say his name correctly. It's Akeka Ragsdale. This is the man that tore apart UTSA last season. He is back. This in itself is what worries me about UTSA's chances this weekend. These three running backs are interchangeable. They can do a ton of stuff. And, to be honest with you, you throw records aside, and I mean, they've got a pretty good record too. It's not like they are terrible.
Mm-hmm.
You can throw records aside, but honestly, both teams, very strong. Wide receivers are pretty solid. You got Roderick Burns, who leads with 22 catches, but I don't think I'm going to say his name correctly. Wide receiver Shair Shorter, 14 catches for 292 yards, 6 touchdowns. He's their big play wide receiver. This is a very good offense. And again, listening to Seth Luttrell's radio show tonight, he talked about UTSA running a 3-man front, and he said, yeah, we've had a lot of success against teams that have the 3-man front on. That's the reason also why they've won 8 consecutive Conference USA games in a row. Not that they've gone against teams with three-man fronts, but he was just kind of talking about, hey, these are the things we've seen. And he also mentioned the fact that maybe UTSA was going to switch up some things on defense because of the fact that, they announced Jamori moving to the line. Are we going to see more 4-man fronts? Because that's where they have struggled against, other teams this season. So something to think about as this game kind of comes up on Saturday is how does the defense react? Does the Lep going to show more of a 4-man front? They've been switching, and even Luttrell kind of mentioned, are they going to switch between 3 and 4-man fronts? They are ready for it. He said it as much as Traylor did. They know each other well. They know what they do. This is going to be a hell of a fight. Let's go to the North Texas defense real quick. I talked about the UTSA defense being 107th. This UNT defense is 122nd overall. They give up 468 yards per game. They give up 35 points per game, which is 118th, which is actually more than UTSA gives up. They're going up against a UTSA offense that's ranked 17th overall with 489 yards per game. 27th in scoring with 36.3 points per game. See the little matchup there? See how it's like we score 36, they give up 35. They score about 30-ish. We give up about 30-ish. Again, even with the teams, there's a lot of similarities. I like to make fun of the defense because their defense coordinator, Phil Bennett, because he dresses like a typical San Antonio tourist in the summer with like the shorts and like just short sleeve like shirt and shorts, and you're like, is he a coach or is he a bum? What's going on?
He just looks like some guy like he's a donor or something that they just let stand on the sideline, and he's not even wearing like North Texas attire. Like sometimes he's just like wearing a random polo or something.
And Luttrell talked about on the radio show, he's like, yeah, he kind of dresses whatever he wants. Like he's got different outfits or whatever that he wears. He's all, but hey, whatever, he does whatever he does. And it was just kind of funny the way Luttrell kind of just said that kind of off the cuff. I give him a hard time for what he's dressing like, but Phil Bennett has done a very good job of reorganizing this defense and at least making them much more competitive. Obviously, again, really shut down UTSA last season. I assume that he's going to have a pretty good hold on what he wants to do this season to slow down Frank Harris. I am worried about defensive end Mason Richards and linebacker KD Davis. Those are the guys who are going to keep up Stein/Maddox and Traylor up at night because those are the big playmakers on the North Texas defense. They also have cornerbacks Deshaun Gaddy, Quinn Whitlock, and Ridge Tashada. I think I said it right. Who are going to be blanketing the big three. They've got pretty good PFF scores. Watching them play against La Tech. La Tech is playing very much of an air raid. they look pretty solid out there. Now, can they handle with this type of wide receiver? I mean, they kind of did it last season. Deshaun Gaddy was out there. The other two really weren't. I think Tashada was. Whitlock, I don't think, was there. But they kind of hung with them last season, so I don't see how they can't do it this season. So, keys to victory for me. UTSA on offense. They need to impose themselves on UNT's defense by dictating that tempo and the physicality. They're going to come after us. And it's not saying that this North Texas defense is impenetrable. They can give up yards. They can, give up points, just like, at times UTSA has. But I think that if Frank and the offense can control and take control of this game, it'll be, well, I'll put it this way. You won't be as highly stressed as you usually are for these games.
Not as many high heart alerts going off on the Apple Watch? Okay, that would be appreciated.
On defense, honestly, they're preparing for what they believe is going to happen, is that we're going to try to stop that run. And in doing so, we have to stay disciplined in that gap assignment because we need to force them to pass. That's how you really start getting to North Texas. That said, when they do pass, got to stay focused on these play action passes because they really do a lot of play action in their passing game, and it's going to be really important for our secondary and our linebackers to be paying attention. So, look, way too early prediction. This is a tough game going into this bye week.
Yep.
And I think it's going to be a physical game, much like it was last season. So who's tougher, the triangle or the emotional color? And I'm referencing Meat Meat Nation, who had put that on Twitter like in 2020. Mean Green, emotional color. Everybody get it? All right. Never mind. Look, it's homecoming. And this was a weird choice to me to have playing at homecoming because you kind of assumed you were looking at an easy win, or at least setting up a team that could give you an easier win. I don't know that North Texas is that opponent. Mm-hmm. Even preseason, I thought North Texas was going to be up there in the CUSA rankings, challenging for the CUSA crown. And to this point, they've shown that they are still in the running for this. Even if they lose to UTSA this weekend, you're going to hear North Texas nipping at our heels.
Yeah, because we got to remember there's no East and West this season, right. So it's number 1 and number 2. So we could beat them and see a rematch. The
thing is that going up 4-0 in the conference puts you at a really good spot to get to that championship game, and UTSA certainly can do it, but so can North Texas. And even if we lost this game, we're still in a good spot to get there. Mm-hmm. And I think that says a lot about where the state of both teams. You mentioned earlier, the last 3 games have been blowouts. I just don't see that playing out this time. And I know I said that probably last season, but I just don't see it. Well, I think I did say it last season. I thought they weren't very good.
But I think you still saw the opposite happening. Yeah.
But I think UTSA finds a way to pull this out, wins the homecoming game 35-31 in the Dome.
Before we go, let's talk about what happened in the rest of Conference USA this weekend.
All right.
Western Kentucky beat Middle Tennessee 35-17. Not really a great game. 4 turnovers from Western Kentucky and 2 turnovers from Middle Tennessee.
This was a game that you kind of hoped that you were hoping that Middle Tennessee would actually pull out. And I'm like, they're still patting themselves on the back about Miami.
Yeah, apparently, again, I said that last week. It was like their apex mountain, we're done for the season, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rick Stockstill at his best.
Apparently. UAB beat Charlotte 34-20, but that score was actually a lot closer at halftime. Charlotte was actually leading. They scored twice in the first quarter, and then they held that lead for a long time and were only able to come up with 1 other touchdown in the second half. So they just sort of imploded a bit.
Charlotte does not have a very good defense. And just overall, Will Healy is now on the hot seat, or at least the seat is getting very warm because there was a lot of hope for him coming out in his first season and having a winning record and going to a bowl game. And then it's just kind of fallen apart since then. So it'd be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah, and I think there were a couple interceptions in that game as well. And then FAU beat Rice 17-14. Rice scored 2 touchdowns in the first quarter and was held scoreless through the rest of the game. It's all she wrote. They also had 3 interceptions.
Yeah, I mean, Rice is, as much as, you have to applaud them for, essentially where they've come to. The other part of this is the fact that they just still don't have playmakers. So, you know.
It would be interesting to see, like, Rice and Charlotte play each other. Do you think they would just be, like, 14-14 and then, like, go into overtime? Like, 14-14 in the first quarter and then just end up going into overtime because nobody could score the rest?
It would be like this. I had a fantasy football match this over the weekend where it was like the other guy that I was playing, it was like, who can be more feudal? Which one of us is going to blow this? Like, we'll get out to like a 10-point lead, but there's no way that I'm going to end up winning. Somehow I ended up winning because his team decided to just give up. I don't know what happened to my team, but they got they were clearly the more motivated team. Mostly because on that team I had this guy named Tariq Woolen. Which brings me to this. Hey, Toves, what happened with Tariq Woolen this weekend?
I mean, another week. It's another Tariq highlight reel, apparently. He had 5 tackles, a pass defended, a fumble recovery, and an interception against Arizona. He now has 4 interceptions on the year from the last 4 games. He is the first rookie since 1970 to have an interception and a fumble recovery in consecutive games. Crazy. Just absolutely crazy the season he's having.
Guys just finding the ball. Like,
yeah.
And that's, I mean, for a cornerback to be doing all this is crazy, especially fumble recoveries. He just has a nose for it, and, you know.
And it's just amazing, and, yeah, we're just going to have this, like, standing Tariq highlight reel, I think, because, I mean...
This week in Tariq.
Yeah. Like, why not? It's great.
I don't blame you. I think it's great. And, you know, again, doing a lot for the brand and doing a lot for, you know, for the Seahawks. Good for them. They're getting rewarded for drafting him in the fifth round.
Yeah, and then we were watching Scott Van Pelt recap the NFL, and he mentions the triangle of toughness when he talks about Tariq. So, you know, great free press that UTSA is getting.
Right.
So.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I think that about wraps it up for us. So thank you for joining us this week on the Hail Mary podcast. I'm Toves.
And I'm the Toves.
We're going to come back next week, and we're going to talk about that win over North Texas.
Oh, here we go. Birds up.